Okay, so good morning, everybody. We're kind of a small group today, but I'm sure more people will be coming in. So today we're going to be talking about part 2 of the book, which was actually a big chunk of the book. It's long, though I went back and looked at it this morning, and it's only 5 chapters, but they're pretty meaty, and it goes everywhere from like household duties, or we're not supposed to use the word chores, and friends, sports, middle school and high school. I actually, it's funny, I reread the chapter on high school yesterday morning while I was standing in line with my daughter at the DMV for an hour. That was lots of fun. But so I wanted to, just like last week where I started with a quote, I found something in this chapter. It's on at the bottom of page 159, that this really resonated with me with having a high school age child. The road ahead is theirs, not ours. As tempted as we may be to pave the way for them so that we can live vicariously through their successes, it is time to let them live their own lives, to unravel our own priorities and needs from theirs. And that's something that, and one of the last questions that we're going to talk about today is, college. And I'm just really finding right now that I always thought this was something I was pretty good about letting my kids live their life. But I'm finding now, especially as my daughter is about to graduate from high school, that I'm really like experiences that I had and things that when I went to my high school and like when I went to college, because I had a really great college experience and I kind of want the same for her. And so I feel like I'm projecting a lot on her, my experience, which is not her experience. And I'm really having to learn this. And so I put this question up, and Yvonne and I were talking about it before we got started. This question, and this is kind of like one of the themes of the book. Do you see yourself as a controlling parent or an autonomy supportive parent? And before I read this book, never would have said I was a controlling parent. I have a very relaxed parenting style. I am not overly strict. I never would have said that I was a controlling parent. But reading this book, I'm like, oh, wow. Like in a lot of ways, I really am. And so that's been really eye-opening for myself. I don't know if you guys, any of you want to kind of let's get this started with this first question. I'm going to stop sharing.
Excuse me. I think when I always thought of like controlling parent, I thought of like, the very like punitive and, micromanaging their schoolwork and making them take harder classes and all that stuff. But the reality is like, for me, it's more of like a control or a perceived control of their safety, right? So I'm like very anxious about everything with them. And that is controlling, like I dropped my son off to get his hair cut last week, and it's straight down the hill from where I live. Probably takes about 10 minutes to walk. And I was going to go back and pick him up. And my husband said, why don't you just let him walk back up? I was like pacing around, like it was not even that big of a deal. And so, like kind of like you said, like I'm so relaxed, I'm so chill, I don't get on their case about a lot of stuff, but that doesn't mean that I'm not controlling in the way that I'm controlling. And I'm working on it, but it is definitely tough.
Yeah, it's just the freedoms that you let your kids have as they get older, and what you allow them to do. It's been really enlightening. Well, let's get into the first question I wanted, and this kind of goes with this. And this was from the chapter of household duties or not chores, but really kind of an overall theme and question I wanted to ask you guys is how can you help your child grow their resolve and resourcefulness? And I think a lot of this is like having them figure stuff out. And Melanie, I keep thinking about the comments you made about your brother last week, about how you and your mom like didn't think he could do anything and he had to kind of go off on his own and like figure stuff out. It actually really resonated with me because I thought of my own brother, and that I've always kind of so surprised that my brother has a job and can like, gosh, this is so horrible, but like, like, because he's my little brother. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was visiting with him. He lives down in Watsonville, and he brought me over to his workplace and he was kind of showing me around his office. And I was like, oh my God, you're such a grown up. Like, I can't, like, he's only 2 years young. Of course he's a grown up, I mean, but I was like, so like, oh, and so I kept thinking about that, and like, how are we teaching our kids? And for me, it's definitely my son. I feel like my daughter is way more, I don't know if she just had more independence. We talked about this, but like, my son is he's very satisfied to let us do everything for him. And we have. So, but then again, I was watching him the other day. I was at home. I think it was on Tuesday. And I was in a meeting. So, when I'm at home and I'm at work, I'm sitting at my dining room table and it faces into the kitchen. And so I'm in a Zoom meeting and like doing the Zoom thing. And I could see him in the kitchen and he is like full on making himself a sandwich and getting everything. And not only making himself a sandwich, he's putting everything back in the fridge. So he's not leaving this mess. And he's just totally not even talking to me, like doing this on his own. And I'm like, wow, look at him. Like, so, and I don't know if I taught him that, or like I think part of it was like I wasn't available, so he had to figure this out, and I think that to me was, showing kids how to do things one time and then just like letting kids like figure it out. And I think like, when like they go off to, I can't remember if it was this, I think it was later in the chapter where it talks about kids when they go off to college and like everybody worries like they're not gonna know how to do their laundry when they go off to college, and like they'll figure it out. Like you got to teach them the tools so that they can figure stuff out.
Yeah. I know. I was glad that you're like surprised that your kid's doing something. I'm like, well, I guess he should be, but I'm so proud right now. Like
I think I'm a very just like controlling person, period. So I like that I thrive on having control over things in my own life. And when I'm out of control, I feel very uncomfortable. And so just the whole, like, how can I not be a controlling parent if that's like my biggest thematic qualm of my whole life anyway. So trying to every single day like let go. And I do think that there's something interesting, right, is we've allowed parenting to be kind of this job, and high achieving people are now taking this idea of parenting and making it like, I'm going to accomplish this job of parenting. And so if I'm good at my career, I also need to be good at my parenting. And then and almost the best thing for them is to ignore them. And not in everything, obviously, because we want them to be like, have good attachment to us and care for them emotionally. But when it comes to like the learning to do household things, like if we're not available, it's better for them. And that's a weird thing to think, because I think there's been a lot of pressure to like, you're constantly with your kid and you're making them, at least for toddlers, you're making them try new foods and healthy foods, and you're supplying these activities and stuff. And yet there is this push on the other side of like, set this up and then walk away and just like sit. And so trying to be okay with that and like not give advice. And I think that's the other thing is, in my job, I give a lot of advice. And I think teenagers like want advice from their teacher because they're asking for it, or they're like, hey, this is the college, I'm thinking of doing this major in college. What is your opinion? And like, I have plenty of opinions. Like, I will gladly give my advice and it works out well. But like, my kids don't always need my advice, because as a mom, like they don't want to hear it from me. They want to hear it from somebody else. And I think that is going to be I think as they grow, I'm going to have a really hard time having them be like, Mom, I don't care what you think. And I'll be like, oh, let me find some of your friends to talk to.
I tell the strategy all the time, but every time I talk to parents, I use it, and I really try to use it with my marriage, with my kids. And if you've heard it before, I apologize. But when my kids are telling me something, I ask them, do you want me to listen? Do you want me to give you advice? Or do you want me just to simply be mad with you? And it's usually listen. And once in a while I'll hear advice and I'm like, oh, I'll like perk up, because tell people all the time, I have 2,000 kids at school that like talking to me and 3 at home that do not. And it's hard to be quiet. And the term that they use in the book, I think, is like duct tape parenting, like basically shut your mouth. And I have a really hard time doing that with my own kids. I go to Costco every week and I bring all these groceries home, yet I still feel this need to like fix them lunch, right? And I wonder how much of that is like, is that a reflection of me? Like I want to like feel like a good mom by providing them lunch, because now I have 3 very able-bodied kids who are in their teens who don't know how to put a sandwich together, or they know how, but they know they don't need to because I'm going to do it for them. And so really this week for me, trying to like step back and let them let them figure out how to eat. My 17-year-old will follow me around telling me he's starving all day long, and the energy he puts into those words could have been to put a sandwich together. And so I get angry about it, but then it's like I kind of created that dynamic in my house. And so, I felt like, is it too late? But I'm like, no, he can still, it's not too late to.
Yeah. So let's shift to the topic of friendships, because I think this is actually a good part to spend some time on. Where you talk about like letting them figure stuff out. And I would say this is actually one area where I have really let my kids just like figure stuff out. And when my daughter, I'm gonna tell you guys a brief story. When my daughter was, I think she was in the 6th grade. I'm pretty sure it was 6th grade. I got a call from the mother of one of her friends. And this was not a friend that I enjoyed. I did not like this little girl. She was a hot mess. And so the mom calls me and was like, hey, Hannah, and so I won't say the girl's name, we're fighting, and I'm just really concerned, and Hannah said mean things to so and so. And I was like, and she was basically like, what are you gonna do about it? And I was like, first off, I was totally taken aback, like, because I'm personally a very non-confrontational person. Like, so to get this phone call like out of the blue, I was like, what? And I was just like, I'm not going to do anything about it. Like, they need to figure that out. And so the question I have for all of you guys is, how do you model positive, healthy friendships? And do you discuss with your teen what characteristics they look for in a good friend? And have you talked about the limits for unhealthy or risky behavior? And one thing I really liked about this particular chapter is I liked, and I wouldn't say I have little notes, like I felt the chapter on household duties got a little preachy, maybe because we're not big on chores in our house, and like, our house is like permanently messy. And so I felt a little preached to in that chapter. I felt the chapter on friends was actually very good and gave really good advice on, as a parent, what kind of questions to ask your kids about friends. And what I really liked was talking to your kids about what attracts them to a certain friend. And I just know, like, for myself, because I tend to be an introverted and growing up was very shy, I always liked the vivacious, like loudmouth friends, because it kind of took the pressure off of me, to have somebody like that that's going to control the conversation and do that. I liked that. And I saw that same pattern with my daughter. And so I guess that, and I just remember like growing up, my mom would always get on me about my friends and didn't like some of my friends. And it always bothered me so much. And so that's, I think, probably one reason, like the friends area was one area that I really have just let my kids like do it on their own, because I didn't like my own mother's interference. So how have you guys felt about friendships?
I think I kind of grew up opposite of you, where my parents had no idea who I was hanging out with. We'd be outside late at night, and you had to like figure out on your own who was your real friend and who wasn't. And my kids tend to be a lot less social than I was at that age, so I haven't really had any issues yet with friendships with them. I spend a lot of time with friends, and not so much this year, obviously, and they see like, it's someone that you trust and someone that you have fun with and someone that you support when they're down and things like that. but I haven't really had like a solid sit down of like, okay, these are the kind of things you should, look for in a friend. And I think for me, my youngest one, he's on the spectrum, and so I was always worried that he would like get bullied. And when he was younger, he would not realize he was getting bullied. He would think they were his friends, and that was really hard. So with him, I've spent more direct time like, yeah, when somebody does this, they're kind of picking on you and not being nice, and it's okay to tell them to stop. So like that kind of stuff. But as far as like who they're friends with, not really.
Yeah, I'm interested because I'm also kind of like the let's just sort of wait and see what happens with friendships. And I liked that there was the like sort of approval to be like, parents, you should not interfere with children when they're trying to negotiate this. And I think it's interesting talking to some of my peers, like teacher peers, when we've talked about like the overextension of bullying, like the idea that like anytime anyone's mean to you, they're bullying you. And as like teachers, we're like, well, when you're doing something really weird and your peers look at you like, why are you doing a weird thing? Like that's normal. That's like a normal thing that is important so that you learn about like social rules, and there's a difference between like repeatedly being verbally abused by someone and when the rest of your peers are like, you're doing something weird right now. Like that's a healthy, normal way to have social interactions. And so it was funny though, because we went to the park. I had just finished reading the chapter on Friends, and my kids are 4 and 2 for the parents that don't know. So I'm a little bit out of the norm of who's here. And there was a little girl and a mom that came and talked to my daughter and my husband. And I was like, oh, I wonder if like Jovi threw sand at her. And like, I totally projected this whole story of like why these adults were talking. And then I asked my husband, I'm like, what happened? And he's like, oh, I don't know. They just came and said hi. I was like, oh. Like, I don't know why I thought like all of a sudden there was some conflict, and then this mom is like coming to like confront my husband and blah, blah. So I think, I mean, luckily, and of course my kids are little, so I haven't had a lot of experiences with this, but people are kind of like, let's just kind of see what happens. And maybe I haven't gotten there yet. I'll be really interested to see what like elementary school is like with that. But I'm also interested because, I'm have an outgoing, dominant personality. My kids are like that too. And I can definitely see them like bulldozing other kids. But it'll be interesting. I'm kind of like, well, maybe they need to have people be like, hey, like stop bulldozing me to see that. I don't know if I should be like, don't be so confident and loud, like
Watch it play out.
So we'll see. I don't know what'll happen when they get there, but
yeah. And the bullying topic is interesting. I mean, that's obviously something as a school that we deal with a lot. And
yeah.
I think there's a lot of, I probably want to say hypersensitivity to it. Not that it's not grounded in stuff. I mean, like cyberbullying and that sort of thing, it is a thing. I mean, it's something that definitely happens, and it's something that, we need to be aware of. I think that social media and the internet has made it a lot easier. People can say things hidden behind a computer screen that they would never have said out loud. And it's something definitely like with distance learning, and like that's pretty much social media, and it's pretty much the interaction that our kids are having right now. So that's certainly something that's a problem. I think that's more high school, like, being aware that, I think with younger kids, really let them do their thing. My daughter's best friend is somebody that bullied her in the 5th grade, to the point I had to email the teacher about it, about like this was happening in the 5th grade classroom. And I didn't realize it was the same girl until like 2 years ago, where Hannah was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. I always laugh and make fun of her because she bullied me in the 5th grade. And I'm like, that's who your bully was? Like, this girl is her best friend. Like, and so they figure that stuff out. So
I don't know what, as a parent, right, you want to protect your kid from being bullied, but like, where's the line? Like, where's the line of like, this is normal, and where's the line of like, this is not normal? And I don't really know. Yeah, I don't know where it is, right?
yeah. So I think that what's really important as a parent to teach your kids is to, especially with bullying, is to not be a bystander. And so when they see somebody being mean to somebody else, to speak up and, say something. I think that that's actually probably the most important thing to teach.
I'm looking at Amy's comment right now, and it makes me think of my dad always. Birds of a feather flock together. He would always tell me that. So if one of my friends got in trouble, it's like, that's how you are going to be associated with it. And Amy says, I tell my kids that their friends will have a huge impact on what kind of person they'll become. So think clearly about who you want to be associated with. And my husband uses the more dramatic one of like, if you're with somebody when they're doing something bad, you're part of it, you're an accomplice, people get arrested too if their friends do, that kind of thing. But really just like allowing them to try, allowing them to venture out. You figure out naturally who you like and who you don't like, or who's a good fit for you, or who's a beneficial part of your life. And, I've kind of seen them go through different friendships like that. But I don't, I try not to meddle too much.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things I liked about this chapter was the advice that they gave as a parent, like figure out what your hard limits are. Like, you can't be doing drugs or alcohol, or I mean, it's going to vary from family to family, like what you're like, no, this is absolutely not okay. And set that as a limit, like this is not okay. And have that be the guideline so that your kid knows that like that behavior is, the limit.
One thing I wanted to mention is that I have a lot of students who have friends that they've met through their games that they meet online, and they're very meaningful to them, and they've established these really deep friendships. And as parents, it's like, that's not really how, maybe Miss Neethling, because she's younger than I am, but that's not really how I had friendships. It was people that I met at school. And so I think a lot of times as parents, we invalidate those relationships and cut them off because of our worry. And so it's kind of a fine line of like, okay, my kid's talking to someone online that I don't know. Okay, yeah, that is scary. It could be potentially dangerous. But at the same time, it could also be a true legitimate friendship that's really meaningful to your kid. And so how do you have those open conversations about that? Like, tell me more about this person. Because they are meaningful. And if we just cut them off, we know what happens when we tell our kids no, right? With something that they're already excited about or involved in, it doesn't really work necessarily. So just keeping in mind that there are legitimate friendships. There are scary things too. So, I don't know if anybody's had that experience of their kids having friendships that maybe not in a way that you did when you were younger. And how do you feel about it?
My favorite thing in this chapter was that they talked about like invite those kids that you maybe aren't certain about over. I think that was, you have your house rules, so what happens in your house, and you don't necessarily have to like hover there, but you can just be like, this is what we do at this house, and you're welcome in. And I think at this time that's like not possible. So that's the one thing about this moment in time where it's like, well, that doesn't happen. So that's really hard. And I think that point of like, you have these friends that you don't even know who they are, where they're from, where they exist. Is this a teenager? Is this not? And I know I'm, a half generation in between these high schoolers and you guys sort of, but I'm like erring on the side of my mentality is that of a 40-year-old. So for me, I'm like, what are these online friendships? Like, is that, or who is that? So I definitely, that is something where I'm in the same boat where I'm like, I don't really get that. Like I want to be friends with people I like physically know. And I think even though that's true, and there's a lot of, in my generation, there was the start of that, like making friends with people online that you don't know. That was one of the things that I learned pretty early, like in 8th or 9th grade, that was like, if I'm going to be friends with you on social media, I also need to like know that you exist in real life, right? Like that was a really important thing for me, and kind of a boundary that I made for myself as all this stuff started. And so maybe, I don't know if that is a rule, like you can be friends with them online, but you have to know that they exist. Like they can, you have to have, I don't know. I have no idea. I feel like I don't know what society will change into in the next 10 years before my kids reach this point, but it does seem like a really difficult thing to navigate with the friendships and the meeting people online. And that has become such a norm,
especially for kids who don't have friends in, real life, and they're meeting people and making their first connections. We want them to be safe because maybe they don't have the ability to differentiate, what's good and what's not within friendships. But, having this unique opportunity, because back in my day when you were like antisocial or weren't able to stay within the confines of social norms, you didn't have friends.
Yeah.
But now it's a little bit different, where you can kind of find people that you connect with over the internet. And we want our kids to have friends, but we also want to make sure they're not, engaging with predators. So it's like that fine balance.
Right. And I think this is one of those areas where, like, you set, some ground rules, like, about, cybersecurity and internet behavior, and you teach them, like, okay, these are the expectations. This is, how you be safe. And then you back off, like,
Yeah. Duct tape.
Yeah. But I was like with Melanie, I liked, the advice of have, the friends, when it's safe, of course, to come over to the house. My daughter still does have her two best friends. She's got her own little bubble. So they do come over, because they're the only people that each other sees. And actually that, I mean, in the pandemic, those are choices that we've had to make, but it's like balancing my daughter's mental health with like physical health. And like, that's been like a huge thing. So we do like come over to the house, and I treated her dating the same way. So, boyfriends, girlfriends that she has had, like come over to our house, because then I'm much more comfortable about having her, be in a romantic relationship at home than in some parked car somewhere in a parking lot and under a shady tree, so.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's talk about sports a little bit. That was the next chapter. And this is something that, growing up, my kids didn't really do sports. Sports kind of really came into our life more in high school. Started a little bit in middle school, but, Hannah really became an athlete in high school. And so that's something, it's been interesting for me to see, and coming into it kind of late. And then, of course, I have my own experience of being a high school administrator and seeing parents in the stands and like having to talk to some crazy parents from time to time. It's like, hey, you can't do that. Don't swear at the referee. That's bad. So what attributes make the most supportive and effective sports parents? And this is something that, really like, what's the fine line between being supportive and being like overly controlling? Because you want to support your kid with their sports, or like you can really actually translate this to like club activity or anything that they're doing that's outside of school, and being supportive of them, as opposed to like trying to act as the coach yourself and like, oh, well, this is how you should train, or this is how you should, do this. And this was something that like, when my daughter started, like I could talk about wrestling. When she started wrestling, it was like for fun and just super casual. And it was like, whatever. I mean, it was, a whole thing like where she had to do the weigh-ins every week. And like, we had to like, she was always hovering on the, weight class. And so as she got more into it though, and got more successful with it, and she herself, got really like, I guess had goals and like was driven to really get better at it. This was something, it did become, it was a part of our family life. And it was especially a sport like wrestling, where like you have to like, your weight has to like be at a certain place. And so, what we like ate as a family and like that sort of, it really, and it was so easy to delve into like becoming too involved in this. And like, I really had to like back off, I don't have to do this.
Yeah, it's, I coached Little League and I was on the board for Little League, and we went through that whole thing with the boys, and we were completely enmeshed in that whole cycle of it, to the point that I think it stopped being fun. And I see that so much, where it's just like not fun anymore. The intention is to like have a wonderful time. And, I was reading in the book, about like, you know, you sign your kid up for baseball at 6 and they're kind of too late because the other kids have been playing since they were, you know, 3, right? And I saw that happen and it was sad because I saw families come in who just wanted to have a good time. And it was like, ooh, do we want that kiddo on the team? Because they don't really, you know, that kind of thing. And it's like, oh my gosh, how heartbreaking. And so my position on it has evolved over the years. And that, you know, I just want them to enjoy something. And if they want to quit it, like if I'm not as involved as I was, like when my oldest one decided, you know, he played baseball, he was really good. And then he decided to retire in like 9th grade. And I was like heartbroken. And I'm like, if I hadn't been so overly involved in it, it wouldn't have impacted me the same. He ended up coming back to it, which was kind of awesome. But you know, that's not for me. Sports were my life in high school. I had so much fun. I think I really wanted that for my kids, but you know, it doesn't have, they can have something different, they can have something else. And so I think the best type of parent is just, you know, on the sidelines, quietly supportive when they need it, providing them opportunities but not being overly,
you know, and it's a weird thing as parents, because as a parent, I can think of like especially last year with wrestling season, it was how I personally got a lot of my social interactions, because you're sitting on the stands with all of those parents for hours. You develop relationships with these people. And then when your kid is like, no, I don't want to do it anymore, you're like, but those are my friends. Like, it's like, you know, it is definitely a weird thing.
one of my core groups of friends are my milpitas baseball moms still. So when he stopped playing, I was like, I'm still gonna go, like lame, right? Like
I'm really curious to see what will happen because I played sports all throughout high school and, you know, did rec in college. And my husband's family was really, really involved in baseball, softball, same thing, to the point where it was like, and they had 4 kids. I'm like, and they were driving hours. And I'm like, why? And my husband's sister like was recruited to play college softball, and she sort of decided like, okay, I'm going to retire and instead of play, you know, at, I think it was like NYU or Columbia or something like that. She ended up going to Cal Poly. But you know, it was completely all encompassing. But I think the important thing was, is this fun? Like, am I actually enjoying it? And so I think, you know, however involved you get, is if that's like the number one, you know, question, like you have, you know, like what's the goal? Are you enjoying yourself? Are you having fun? Do you like it? And you might still like it, but you might not like all the politics of it. Like I know, like I still love playing sports. Like, oh, let's play spike ball, let's play volleyball. I'm very competitive. I love to play. And like I wish there were more like rec leagues, but you know, how am I gonna have time to do that? So but I love sport and I'm excited to play with my kids. But at the same time, like sometimes there just gets to be too much politics. Like, you know, if you don't say the right thing, or if you're not, you know, in this position, you can't play and all this stuff. And remembering it's like, you can still love the sport and play the sport and do it in a different way and not have to do the rat race. But I think there is a lot of like validation as well as a lot of like, it's, you know, it's the same thing with college. Like, oh, I got into this college. I made the varsity team. I did, you know, it's like to prove you're only good enough if you have this label associated with it. So I think that it's all tied into the same thing. And I know I fall into that as an individual. So how, you know, I don't know if I'll be able to ignore that as a parent, to be like, okay, you can still be the best at soccer, but we're not going to play on the high school team because you don't like the coach or whatever. Like, but then how can you be the best? You know?
Yeah, the saddest thing I've heard, you know, from my daughter as a parent, well, I don't say the saddest thing, but like with sports, you know, she was talking about one of her teammates and she's like, so and so hates wrestling.
Yeah.
But her parents won't let her quit. She hates it. And I'm like, that's awful. Like, that's just awful.
It kind of makes me think like, if I checked on my kids every day the way that I do on their grades in their school load, if I checked in with them about how much fun they're having in life and how much they're enjoying things, it would be a totally different world in my house. I've never gone into my kids' room and been like, hey, you know, is there something today that we can do that you would find fun or relaxing? Like, it would never happen. And so I'm kind of thinking of like trying to make that shift of like, what would happen? if I did that. Like, hey, is there something fun you want to do today? Because I ask kids all the time, what do you do for fun? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, oh my God. High school should have some components of fun in it, and it doesn't feel like it does for a lot of kids.
All right, so let's move on. I want to skip to the high school chapter and skip the middle school chapter. Though, as you know, my son's in middle school, I did enjoy that chapter, but I think for our purposes and our conversation, let's just skip over to the high school chapter. Though I will just tell you that the part of the middle school chapter where they talk about, first off, if you have a child that has executive functioning issues, they give really great advice in that chapter about executive functioning and some really great tips. I had to laugh out loud. Actually, it did laugh out loud where she was talking about like sticking her hand in like the middle school backpack and not knowing like what was gonna, because that, believe me, I lived that with my son. It's so gross. Like, what is happening here? Though with my daughter too, because she, like, for the longest time, you know, now that she's not going to school physically anymore, this doesn't happen. We know where all our forks are. But like there was this period where my husband and I were like, where are all the forks in our house? Like, where are they all going? And they were all in Hannah's backpack. It was awesome because she was bringing them to school to eat
I
her.
was telling my mom about the chapter, and she goes, you used to sharpen your pencils into your backpack.
So gross.
I'm like, are you kidding me? She's like, no.
Okay. So my question is, you know, with our high school age kids, like, are you currently giving your child space and the opportunity to learn, fail, recover, and move on? If so, what's working? How could you step back and allow your child to have some more space? And I'm going to combine with the next question. And as your adolescents are making their way through high school, how can you show your support for, that says good decisions, but I think you know, you got to be accepting of their bad decisions too. And so one thing, and this is conversation, you know, Yvonne and I, we've been doing these talks with parents. This is our third year. And the topic of how to let your child fail is a topic we cover every year. And I feel like every time we have this conversation, the question comes up, like, and they talk about this in this chapter about high school. If I let them fail, there's going to be so many repercussions. They're not going to get into the college that they want. Like, they're not going to be able to recover from this. And so how do we combat that, you know, with this idea? Because, you know, when you're talking about littler kids and, you know, this concept of failure, it's easier because there's so much time. When you get into the high school age kid, and I just know this from dealing with parents and talking to parents and the fears that they have, that in high school, I can't let them fail because it's too late. They're not going to be able to recover, and it's going to have such an impact on their life because they're not going to get into the college that, you know, they wanted to get into, and, you know, then they won't get the job. And like, there's just this fear that there's going to be this lasting impact. And the argument that the book makes is, so what? Like, that could be a good thing. But that's it's like a terrifying thing as a parent.
Well, I think it's hard because, like, you know, I've mentioned this before, as I took my son in October on like college tour, right? Well, at that time, he's already established his grades pattern, you know, his grade patterns and things. And I felt bad. Like, I felt sad for him that there were schools that he really liked that are reach schools, right? And I've had to kind of watch him suffer through that disappointment. And, you know, he even kind of turned that around on me, like, why didn't you push me harder? You know, and it's like, you can't win, right? Like, I don't really know what the right thing to do. If I pushed you harder, you would have been mad. If I didn't push you, you would have been mad. And so, you know, he's gotten an acceptance letter, and then he's got his heart set on some schools that I don't want to like minimize his ability, but I mean, they're reach schools. And I'm like bracing myself for that disappointment, but I there was nothing else I could do. You know, I couldn't make him, you know, try harder or put more effort into things. And, you know, having to watch the repercussions of that play out sucks. Like, I hate it. Like, I want to like fix it for him and get, you know, and I can't. And so, you know, yeah, so what? So his journey might look a little different than he had anticipated or that I had hoped. But, you know, it is what it is now. We can't go back. And
yeah, you know, there's a part in this chapter where it talks about, actually what I really liked about this chapter is how it broke it down, like 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. Though it was interesting because, you know, it's writing about like most schools and talks about the 10th grade year, there's more choices. And I'm like, oh, not like 10th grade years where there's no choice. Like, you know, these are the classes you take. So it didn't quite match up with our reality of high school here, but it was pretty close. But it talks a lot about, you know, letting your kids pick their own classes. And I disagreed with with her advice a little bit. I do think, yes, you should let your kid pick their own classes. Like as a parent, you shouldn't be like, no, you need to take this class. I absolutely agree with that. You know, and it has the quote from the teacher, like on back to school night, where the teacher's like, this is a really challenging course. And if your kid chose to take this class and wants to take this class, they're going to do great. If you chose as a parent for them to take it, it's going to be a struggle. And I thought that was like such huge, really great advice. As a former AP teacher, I'm like, yes, absolutely. Totally 100% agree. One thing that I think that the chapter doesn't really address very well is peer-to-peer pressure that kids face. And this is something that we've talked about as a school, where kids will think like, oh, all of my friends are taking this AP class, so I need to take this AP class. Obviously, I need to take this too. And I think that as a parent, you need to really be on the watch for that and have those conversations. I think it's really, don't let your kids just pick their classes and like, you don't pay attention to it. Let them have a lot, like they should be the driver of the classes that they're selecting. But you as a parent really need to be having conversations and asking the right questions. Like I just remember my daughter in her sophomore year and signing up for classes to go into her junior year. She's like, well, I guess I have to take AP bio. And I'm like, no, you don't. What? And she was like, well, yeah, everybody says you have to take AP bio. And I'm like, Hannah, you hate science. Like, why are you, don't take AP bio. That's a terrible idea. Don't do that. And so I think that that's really important to have those conversations.
And I've seen students like invalidate their own successes because they didn't take hard classes. Like a 4.0 isn't a 4.0 that's really meaningful unless you took classes that are as hard as your peers. And I'm like, wait, what? Like you did wonderful. It's like, yeah, but I took the easy way out, you know? I mean, that's the mentality that I hear. And it's like heartbreaking. It's like, no, you worked hard, whether or not you took those classes, you got really good grades and you should be really proud of yourself. And it's like, you know, and I'm like, how did this come to be? You know, when straight A's aren't enough, you know.
Yeah. Melanie, I'm curious because you teach an advanced placement class, and what have you seen with this? And did you like that, you know, with that quote with the teacher about like who picks the class and like the success of it? Have you found that? I mean, I certainly resonated with that, but
Yeah, I have an advantage. My class, although it's AP and there is there is college rigor to it, it's like a very approachable class, because I teach psychology, so it's just about you. So even if the kid isn't really interested in putting in the like hard work, it's pretty easy to get like a B. Unless you are just like, I'm not going to do anything, and then you would not do well in any class. So for an AP class, it's very approachable. So I tell that to students, where it's like, if you want to challenge yourself and take any AP class, take this one, because it's the most approachable, I think. A lot of the vocabulary are words that you've already heard of before. So it's not, as tough as bio in that regard. Granted, there are kids that do like the peer pressure stuff. I had one student this year who was like, oh, this assignment we did, wow, there's like critical thinking in this. I'm like, yeah, dude, like this is AP Psych. Like I'm not just like here like fluffing around. Like I actually want you to grow in your ability to like read and think and produce good stuff. So there is a little bit of that with the sort of people who don't really want to take an AP class, and they are. But I think for psych, at least, it's more of the peer-to-peer pressure to take it than it is like parents. I think the science and the math classes have more parental pressure to take than AP Psych, in my opinion. But yeah, and I think that's my opinion. But I also think it's interesting with the college stuff. I was just thinking back about my parents. They wanted me to go to college, but they didn't really care where. Like that, there wasn't this like competitive nature. But I felt a lot of pressure from my peers. I was like, okay, I need to go to a UC and I need to be able to go to the best UC I can get into to like prove to my peers that I'm of this caliber. And really, I probably should have gone to a state school, and I probably should have gone to a smaller state school. Just because UC was huge. And I went to UC San Diego, and the social life there is like not the emphasis. It's like kind of cutthroat. Now my husband gets mad when I say that. I should have gone to like Cal Poly because I met him at college. So he's always like, what are you saying? But like the first year I really struggled socially. It was the first time I'd ever moved. I moved far away from home. It was like the school stuff was okay, but it was the social stuff. And I had never had issues with social stuff before. So sometimes I, when kids are disappointed, like, oh, I got into this school, I only got into this school. I say, well, like, there are all types of people there. And maybe this was meant to be for a reason, whether it's academic or not. And I think a lot of kids say, oh, well, I got into Davis and I got into UC, I got into San Diego. And I want to go to Davis, but I kind of also want to go to San Diego. And there are people who want to be like doctors or going to get like a physician's assistant. I'm like, there's life beyond 4 years of college, move to San Diego for a job, go there for graduate school. Like there's so much more to it. So it's not just like, this is your only chance to get out. Like, I think that's what the kids see, that this is their only chance to do something new, do something different, go to college. It's like, unfortunately, there's a lot more than just the 4 years. You're probably going to have to go to school for 7 years, no matter what you do. So go like, think about this for now. But then if you really have that dream reach school, you can still get there. And whether that means do community for 2 years and then go to it. How many friends do I know that went to community? They went to De Anza for 2 years and then went to Berkeley. Like, a lot. And they were kids who would never have gotten into Berkeley straight out of senior year. So they had that opportunity because they chose to go to community college. And now they got the Berkeley experience. So
yeah. So I guess that thank you. That's kind of perfect segue into the last question, is like, as a parent, how much should you be involved in the college application process? Yvonne, I just went through this. I'm curious, Yvonne, like how much you did with the college. Like I did zero, was not involved at all. The only reason my daughter, she did not apply, she only applied to 3 schools, all of them were CSUs. And the only reason she did that is it was a assignment in her AVID class, which honestly is kind of weird. If we're going to get into that, like you had an assignment to apply for college, it's weird, whatever. It's the only reason she did. And, because she has like all year, I've been really open about her struggles with depression and anxiety this year. And she, like honestly, last summer was like, I am not ready to go to a 4-year school. I am not ready to be out on my own. I need to go to a community college. And I personally, this is like struggle I've had of like my own, like college was so great, and like leaving the house and moving away and going, it was such a great experience for me that I want her to have that experience. But that's not the experience that she needs. Like, and I've had, like, we honestly have had conversations just this week about this, where I'm still like pushing, like, well, maybe you could go to San Francisco State. And she's like, Mom, I don't want to. I want to go to a community college. Like, this is what I need. And I'm having to like, oh, in my mind, like, step back. What is wrong with you? Like, this is her life. And it's really, it's hard. It's a really like, because you have ideas, and especially, and I don't know if this is something that it's harder for me because I'm an educator and because I know about the system. And I, throughout high school, like where I say let her pick her own classes, I'm like, no, you got to take a 4th year of math. You really need to do that. Or make sure you get through Spanish 3, because that's really like, what you need to do. And so I have definitely guided her with, these are the courses you should take to get into a 4-year school. And so it's been an experience of like, she's like, no, I don't want to go to a 4-year school. I'm like, oh, right.
As far as like the application process, I took him on a road trip. We saw a bunch of schools. And then the next I heard about it, he asked how many he could apply to. And then I gave him the credit card for the application fee. Like that was it, really. And, in the book, it talks a little bit about like once they get to college, and this was where it got kind of interesting, is I was talking to him yesterday. I said, you're 18 and that means you can make your own doctor's appointments now. And it turned into this like argument. He's like, no. A lot of college kids have their mom still make their appointments. Like he wanted me to do that. And I'm like trying to like step back and I'm like, no, there's like private stuff you might need to talk about. And he's like, no. Everybody says that in college, your parents still do that. You don't do that until you're like later. So I'm like, oh Lord, here we go. So it was like that part of it was like, so it's like we're in this like weird time where it's like, yes, I'm still your mother, but yes, I need to back off and let you do what you need to do to be an adult. And so we're kind of stuck in this like weird space. He's still my baby, but he's a grown up now.
I liked the advice that the book gave about college with, it was like, if you're paying the bills, you can talk to them about paying the bills, but that's it. And I have a very good friend of mine who's a college professor at Skyline College. And which honestly, I was having a conversation with her the other day and I like felt really bad with me being like, no, you shouldn't go to a community college. And like one of my best friends is a professor at a community college. I'm like, oh God, awful. She'd be so mad at me. But she was like, yeah, like I've had parents call, like, I'm not gonna even talk to them. Like I thought it was very good advice that it does reflect bad on your kid. Like you're,
like not just you, but your kid too.
Like what's going on. And so I think that, this is what I liked when I was talking about the senior year is really letting them start doing more things on their own. I ran into that yesterday at the DMV. Like, okay, so like we had to stand in line. I mean, obviously I had a driver to the DMV, right? So we stand in line outside for an hour before they open. It was so many people at the DMV, it was crazy. And then we have to get in and like the way they have it, because they have ever like the seats like 6 feet apart. So we couldn't even sit next to each other. And so they were waiting for her number to be called. And I was like, do I get up with her and go to the counter with her? Like, what do I do? Like I'm really just her ride. She doesn't need me. And I didn't. Like, I'm like, she can do that. And like, so her number calls, she looks at me and I'm like, good luck. And she did great. I mean, she was like over there for like 20 minutes, like taking the test and everything. And she comes back around the corner and she's like, I passed. And she was like, so, and I'm like, I'm so glad I wasn't standing with her. Like, cause that would have been weird. Like, what am I going to do? Stand over? Cause they wouldn't have let me like stand with her as she's taking this test. And then.
Just reading Amy's comment now about like growing up in Taiwan, it was a very different process. She said standardized test decided which college you may get into. But here it's like we do have all these obstacles and hoops and choices and you got to do this and that, and it's not enough to just get good grades. You got to take harder classes and show your leadership skills, and that's hard. It's hard on kids. It's hard on our time commitments for them. Like it's hard. I'm burnt. Like I'm exhausted.
I think it's like having a conversation about like what's the expectation for your kids after high school? Like, are they gonna go get a job? Are they still living at home? Like, I think they're 18, they are adults, they're still young and they don't know anything. But that is like really weird. Like, I think you have to, Yvonne, you got to stop making the doctor's appointments and like, like I think like that just, they need to start doing that stuff on their own. And I guess I've been thinking about that a lot because Hannah is going to go to community college, so she is still going to be living at home next year, but it's am I going to be expecting her to be home like at meals? Like, what's the communication going to be like?
Right. I didn't think about that. Like he can come home when he wants. No, that doesn't feel right.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's still rules. I have an interesting experience because I, went away for 4 years, did a 5th year at Santa Cruz. And then I got this job, when I was 23, and I moved home for 1 year and then I got married. So like I lived at home as an adult and it was like, yeah, but I have a paying job. Like I'm just saving a lot of money and I was never there, but I was also 23. It's different than when you're 18, and then my brother lived there for a long time, but he was even older. Now I live at home again because we're remodeling our house. So now it's like me, my husband, and my kids and my parents. So that's a really also interesting dynamic because now I'm also seeing like my parents parent my kids a little bit. And I'm like, let them fail, let them spill syrup. And my mom's like, no, my table. And I'm like, ah. So that's another, like, you definitely see like the generational, like, parenting styles come about. But I like what they said about the grandparents and the sports who are just like, they just want to see them have fun. It's been really fun to see like my parents just kind of be more chill. Although I think it'll be even more, they'll be more chill when we're not living in their house and messing up all their stuff all the time. But like just seeing them find joy in what the kids are doing versus me and Dan are a little bit like, just, it's like stressful, you know, like, are we doing this right? Are we doing this potty training thing right? Are we doing this, you know, like your foot's turning out when you walk? Do you have do you have some issue, or are you just like habituating walking weird with my son? And we're like, no, don't call the doctor. Or do we call the doctor? You know, it's like all that, like,
I mean, even my parents are like, it's so much more fun to be a grandparent. And I'm thinking to myself, like, how can I make this more fun right now? I mean, it's fun, but there's just all the worries and stuff. I would love to just be able to like show up and hope they're enjoying themselves the way that my parents are able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so it is 10 o'clock, so we'll end for today. Thank you guys for this conversation. Obviously, we're taking next week off because it's going to be the February break and we don't have school next week. But then when we come back in 2 weeks, we'll just do part 3, which is actually fairly short. And yeah, all right. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.